welcome to Welcome Change. This is Ashoka's weekly news hour where we get to sit down with entrepreneurs around the world and learn from them, from their wisdom, their journeys, and their ideas. My name is Alexandra. I'm with the Ashoka team, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Manu Gupta, the founder, co-founder, and head of SEEDS, which stands for Sustainable Environment and Ecological Development Society. Welcome, Manu.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here,
Thank
Alex.
you. Thank you for joining. Already a bit late in Delhi for you, but thank you for taking the time. And so Manu and I will be discussing about a very timely topic. We will be talking about disaster resilience and management, and about Manu's 30-year experience in literally transforming the field and the way people look at the problem in India, but also abroad. And the way this will work is Manu and I will talk for about 15 to 20 minutes and then dedicate about 10 minutes to your questions. So feel free to add your questions, your comments, your ideas in the chat box, and we'll address them towards the end. And so we have a lot of ground to cover today, Manu. Let's start. And if you allow me, I'd like to maybe set the context with a couple of data points just to help people understand the magnitude. The first one is, at the current rate, by 2030, there will be at least 5 more climate disasters every single day around the world. We know, and we were just talking about this, that a household affected by a disaster requires, in average, 19 years to recover from the economic loss and damage. And we could also talk about the emotional cost. And this is true for India, but it might also be true for the global south, right? And your country specifically, Manu, India, is one of the most climate hit countries in the world. I believe it's in the top 10. Yes. And the expectation is that 300 million people will experience firsthand a climate disaster by 2030. This is, you mentioned, 1/5 of India's population. So disasters are wake-up calls at many levels, and we have no time to lose, no? And this is why, Manu, you've created SEEDS. You created SEEDS 30 years ago when you were a young student. And since then, you've impacted the life of more than 6 million people. Tell us a bit more about SEEDS and what are the new perspectives that SEEDS brings to the world.
Thank you, Alex, for having me here in this session. And I'm looking forward to our conversation today. And I hope we have something useful that our audience can take away. SEEDS, as you rightly said, was started 30 years ago in a college canteen. Very little did we know what we are getting into at that point of time. We were looking at rapid urbanization and its impact on people around urban areas. But the more we got into that, we saw the impact of extreme events, cyclones and floods and how they took away lives. But we also saw, as I was backpacking then, and I was, doing relief work for other organizations, larger humanitarian organizations. I realized that, while humanitarian action is all about relief after disasters, these disasters are actually preventable. They are all man-made. For example, you would have heard of the famous saying that it's not the earthquake that kills people, it's bad buildings that kill people, And so we started looking at how do we prevent disasters in the first place? How do we save lives? How do we protect lives from, going away? How do we protect livelihoods, people's dependence on livelihoods, education, health, and all of that? And the perspective that we thought was that not just look at relief, but then extend that spectrum to look at prevention, look at better preparedness, so that they are ready when the cyclone actually comes their way. And then look at long-term recovery, which makes them better than what they were before, building back better, building back them stronger and more robust. And the other new thing that we learned in the process of doing this kind of work is, Alex, the power of people and their participation and how they can become partners. Because up until then, the whole humanitarian action was about, giving support and relief to people who are affected. So people were like passive receivers. We never thought of bringing them into the fold. And I think that was one big learning that we have tried to bring into our work.
And how do you do that? Because we talk, agencies are focused usually in specific parts of disaster management. You cover the whole life cycle, and you're well known for, humanizing disaster management, and you're actually showing how to distribute this ability for communities to solve for themselves. How do you do that practically?
So I'll give you an example, Alex. In the Nepal earthquake that struck Kathmandu and many other cities in 2015, thousands of lives were lost, but about 600,000 houses were lost across the country. And obviously, it was a huge task trying to rebuild 600,000 houses in the shortest possible time because people were without a roof over their heads. And so we adopted what is now called and documented very well, called the owner-driven reconstruction approach, where instead of just getting a contractor to build houses, and so many of them, we asked people to become our partners, and they decided how and when and what kind of houses they want to make, and they contributed their own time, their labor. And our role was more about providing them the essential technical assistance, like training them as to how to make a safe house so that it doesn't collapse in the next earthquake, and some financial support with which they can use to buy material and also hire some construction workers. Uh, and so that kind of partnership, Alex, worked out, and in just about, I think it was less than 24 months, that we had some 26,000 houses built by people themselves in this area that we were working. We were working in Gorkha, which is one of the worst affected districts. So that's the power of people participating in their own reconstruction and thus becoming more resilient as well.
Hmm.
And I can give you many more examples, but yeah, this
It's
is something
beautiful
that's
to
stuck
see
in my
the how you break the dependency cycle, no,
head.
with people, and you actually put them front center of solving the problem. And so far, 30 years into this journey, having started as a backpacker, you've impacted the lives of more than 7.5 million people, and you're working to impact 300 million in the next 10 years. How do you distribute this ability to solve at scale?
Yeah, and I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if we can really reach that level of being able to impact. But Alex, the so all these years, majority of these 30 years has been spent in actually chasing disasters. So I've been to over 50 emergencies now, actually going and supporting people and helping them recover and build their strengths to be able to withstand future disasters. But we can't be doing that all the time. It seems that the number of disasters, like you said in the beginning, is increasing. And, a small organization like ours cannot be, just doing what it has been doing. And so we felt that we need to impact at scale, and somehow having learned so much from so many emergencies, so many disasters, can we create a population scale impact? And that's where we got exposed to the Ashoka's Aspire program, where we were given this opportunity to dream a dream like this, where people of such numbers can be impacted. So the essential part of this change that we are going through currently, and now it's about 3 years, is that as an organization, we are shifting our role from becoming just from being just implementers to now becoming orchestrators, where we are not trying to scale the organization, but scale the impact by bringing in actors from the ecosystem. Other aid agencies, partners with other grassroots organizations like ours, connecting them through a network, building a platform, using technology, and so on and so forth. And now we feel, and this is not very unique in many ways. I think around the world, digital technologies have enabled impacts at scale. So a lot of that learning has come in to see how we can build more resilient communities. How do we help more and more people better anticipate disasters and thus be able to save their lives?
And what is the role of markets, the role of insurance companies, procurement? What are you seeing?
I think markets have a very important role, Alex, in this. It comes down to making sure that we are able to provide as much resources which are suited to people's vulnerabilities, their needs, and which are very unique. A coastal community would be very different from a community in the Himalayas in very high elevations. There is that need to provide more resources that are based on their context and in the quickest possible time, and so that they are able to save themselves, they are able to become strong enough to withstand the impacts of disasters. And I think the markets or the private sector, I think, can come up with and they're known for their innovation, they're known for their efficiency. That is needed to be able to work at scale to provide, for example, very unique or innovative financial instruments to be able to reach people and to reach money to the people so that then they can take decisions for their own safety, for their own protection. Also, I think it also makes a very strong business case, Alex, for the markets to be there. We are seeing how increasingly the number of disasters are leading to huge disruptions in supply chains, in manufacturing, in service industry, and there, and it's a vicious cycle. It leads to more unemployment and disruptions and all of that. So I think it's about time that the markets have an active participants in this whole process.
Interesting. We're actually seeing some comments regarding this. Let's change a little bit of gears, Manu. You started in this field also not only focusing in construction workers and masons, but also children, which is a personal topic of interest. And we've talked about the incredible ability of children to spot new patterns and to observe reality in a way that unfortunately adults sometimes we've lost that ability, no, and that connection to the natural world. Tell us a bit more about the role of children in all of this.
Yeah, I think that was something that was not very sort of deliberate in our initial scheme of things, I feel like. But the 2001 major earthquake happened in the western part of India, and unfortunately, in that earthquake, there were some 400 children in a small town called Anjar that who lost their lives. They had gone to school. They were doing a march past in their town, and the walls collapsed, and it was a very, very tragic incident. What prompted us that time, and it was not just us, a lot of other agencies, was that let's make sure that our children are safe from disasters, and let's prioritize that. And so we started together with the government a program on ensuring schools are safe. And that meant that schools become better prepared for disasters. The buildings are strong. If there is an earthquake, or if for that matter, a flood, they are able to evacuate and reach home, meet their parents safely, and all of that. And so we started preparing schools, and it was very, very successful. And these children also took messages home. But what was very interesting in this whole process, like you said, Alex, that the sense of observation children have about potential risks was something that we were blind to in some way. Our eyes are not so sharp when it comes to looking at potential problems that can lead to disasters in future. And that power of observation we felt has to be mainstreamed in the overall process of preventing disasters. And that's how today we just don't, it's not just children, but also adolescents and youth. And we've given them tools like mobile phones to take pictures and report and, structure that a little bit and have dialogue with their local authorities, with the electricity department, and tell them, look here, if there is a disaster, this is going to come on my head, and, things like that. And I think that is something that we should celebrate, and we should be consciously bring into our, system of thinking and system of programming. Yeah, but
Beautiful.
this is just one of them. I mean, there's so many that I've learned from them. Just the fact that, the children, while going from home to school, walking
Mhm.
down, have such a sharp observation, and just observing them as to how they respond to their own environment gives us a lot of learning about what could be done in a potential disaster in future.
Beautiful. Um, Natural disasters make us feel powerless, people in general, or at least before meeting you. And I've had this personal experience with the recent floods in my home country in Spain, where the disaster itself counted for a certain amount of damage, but it was especially the lack of mindset frameworks, preparedness, and institutional leadership that I believe was truly devastating. No, it's what you mentioned at the beginning. It's not the flood, but it's the building. No, how
Right.
do you shift that narrative from powerless to powerful?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question about, this whole disasters when it strikes. And, for that matter, any emergency that happens, for a few moments, we are powerless. We are in, in some state of paralysis, and depending on the disasters, this could extend for hours, days, months, and even years, 19 years for a family to recover completely from one disaster. Imagine the kind of impact it can have. So, but also the human nature, and I'm trying to put the right words here, is inherently very resilient. We are adaptive species, and therefore, can we build that strength in ours by restoring that dignity of life, because that's the one thing that gets affected in a disaster, and that leads to powerlessness. So if we can work on restoring that dignity and providing that sense of independence and sense of self-respect, then I think that becomes the starting point for empowering people. And that can happen through a variety of ways. A psychologist will tell you more, but what we have learned from experience is merely listening to people. At that point of time, often people are just wanting somebody to hear them and hear their suffering. Or for that matter, as I said earlier, getting them to participate in their own recovery, not keeping them as, just as a passive audience, but telling, okay, let's pick up this spade together and let's rebuild. The faster we do, the better it would be, etc., etc. And the third thing I feel is, how do we restore their social bonds? The social community there. And you talked about Valencia in Spain, and there were these WhatsApp messages where people were singing songs to, connect and reconnect with each other, in that town of Chiwa, I think, if I pronounce that correctly. And I think that's a great power of restoring that dignity of people. And I think we should bring that in while we are doing all the relief, we are doing all the material assistance that we are providing to people.
Mm.
How do we ensure that we restore that dignity of life?
And now we travel to Poland, to Brazil, to Spain. We sit down in the table with the presidents of these countries and with their cabinets, and with their leadership. These countries have experienced massive floods, wildfires in the recent months. What would you tell them to focus on?
Well, that's an interesting question. If I do get a audience with them, I think there are two messages I would like to give to them. One that, um, they need to think that they can't just do it alone anymore. It's traditionally it was like always this structure that government is the duty bearer and therefore they have that responsibility. Of course, that fundamentally that is still true, but they now need to open up to have the markets, the civil society, all of them working together to be able to solve some of these crises. Because the crisis doesn't actually happen when it happens. It happens much earlier. There are early signs which local civil society can detect, and they can work with markets, they can work with local governments to solve some of those problems even before it really happens. That's one message. And the second message is that they need to decentralize. They need to believe in their municipalities, their local governments. Um Disaster is always thought of as a command and control thing. You send in uniformed people in planes and and trying to save lives. Of course, it is required, but it is also required that we get the early warnings in place. It is also required that long after the disaster is over, we restore that dignity, we restore the conditions better than what they were before the disaster. For all that, you need local governments, you need local organizations, the academia, and all of them to work together. So that shift of power is required, Alex, and that is what I would tell them. How it gets translated, I don't know. It's for them to figure out.
Maybe they're listening, so who knows?
Yeah, I hope
And
so.
there was actually a question on this militaristic way of handling disasters.
Correct.
I
Yes.
think it's great. There's many questions coming in. I'm going to share some of them. I think a beautiful one is, how do you bring these regenerative mindsets and approaches that are needed to prevent floods? No, how do you bring that into the conversation?
Sorry, I didn't get it. What was the first part of your question?
The regenerative
Ah,
practices in the environment, regenerative agriculture, etc. I know you work with a lot of nature-based solutions too. How
correct,
how
correct.
do you tackle that?
Yeah, I think the so with all the industrialization and urbanization, we moved very naturally, without perhaps realizing as much, that concrete and bricks are the answer to prevent disasters. So you build strong walls, you bring sea walls and large highways and large culverts, etc. And the nature of disasters is such, and especially with the climate change, it has become far more intense now. And new areas are getting impacted, like in Spain, in Poland, and other countries. It has become much more unpredictable. So you don't have enough warning. So in the such cases, nature has always been a very, very robust natural barrier to such extremes of temperature, since time immemorial. So how do we start looking at nature-based solutions to kind of address some of these challenges of preventing? So I can give you one example where we are trying to restore, and that comes and answers your question about regenerative approaches. We are trying to restore a very, very fragile coastal area by growing more mangroves and bioshields. We call them, and these bioshields are basically rows of trees and plant species that can act as wind buffers. They dissipate waves, very high tidal waves, for example. They prevent the sand from being taken away by tidal waves, etc. So I think there is tremendous power there of these nature-based solutions, of these regenerative approaches. And most importantly, I think they are very affordable, very sustainable, and where local communities can participate, people can participate. These concrete structures require large engineering and construction companies to come with their, large bulldozers and cranes and do that. And
Mm.
people are just watching, from the side. So I think there is, and this is now a growing science about how nature and nature-based solutions can become the best barrier against disasters.
We have a great question that says, Manu, is there a specific moment from your childhood that created a special bond with nature? Do you think your love for nature shapes the way you work? And what do you think that we can do for to make sure that humanity starts loving nature and therefore save nature, no, in a way?
Well, I think fundamentally, all of us love nature. We are very deeply connected to nature, and we love to go to natural sites and national parks and spend time with our family. It's just that we think of it as a recreation or a break to our normal routine. Um, but that fundamental connect is always there. And what we have learned from all this experience is that um, if we can restore that traditional connection, that traditional wisdom that is there between us human beings and nature, we will be able to solve many of these so-called natural disaster problems. So in that sense, just educating myself and educating people around me about the power of nature and its ability to protect, its ability to regenerate and sustain a life is itself, powerful enough, and it leads to a shift in that thinking, and that in turn leads to solutions. I don't know whether I answered that correct, in
Yes, you did. Why did you
that
say
word.
so-called natural disaster?
Yeah, there is this whole debate going on whether disaster should be called natural at all in the first place, because disasters somewhere, when you do a root cause analysis, turns out that it is a human-made problem that has led to that disaster. And we often say, like, an earthquake in the middle of an ocean will not harm anybody, but an earthquake in the middle of a city is going to harm a lot of people if the buildings are not made in the right manner. And we have seen that around the world. Certain countries have done very well, certain countries have performed very poorly, which meant more suffering, more losses.
Hmm.
So there's always this debate, natural or man-made, should we call natural as a term at all?
That's a good question for the audience too. We have a lot of comments. I'll send those questions over to you, Manu. But maybe my last question is: you started this, as you said, in your college canteen. You were a young backpacker, younger backpacker, 30 years ago, and you've probably seen way too many disasters, no? And you've experienced them firsthand. After seeing so much destruction, how has this changed your relationship with the natural world? And most importantly, what brings you hope?
I Yeah, I mean, what I've seen is, of course, a lot of these disasters, Alex, but I've also seen a lot of hope in people. In spite of, all the suffering, all the losses that they have experienced, there is still that inherent resilience to bounce back. And that gives me a lot of hope. Unfortunately, in our current system of thinking, we don't build on that hope that much. We don't recognize that as an ability that people have. And I feel if we start really thinking about it more seriously, we will not only be able to help people recover better, but hopefully get people to actually overcome any adverse impact of disasters in their life. So what that would mean is that they're able to anticipate better, they're able to survive, they're able to adapt because, maybe rice is what they've been growing, but the floods take away all the rice. So maybe they switch something to something like vegetable farming, which has shorter gestation period and they can sustain their income. So there are ways to adapt, and then there are ways to thrive also in spite of these disasters. So I uh, I I believe that that's the power that we need to really build on. And disaster and climate change is a reality. People are talking about a tipping point of 1.5 degree happening in near future. If you ask me, it has already happened. We are seeing, I mean, the pandemic was one in some way. Of course, it was not related to climate change, but it is a sign of things to come. And, this 2024 has been the hottest year for Europe, for much of South Asia. We are seeing more floods, like you said. So it's already reached. The tipping point is there, and it's a new reality. So I think we have to focus a lot on how do we bring out that resilience that is already there, give it more shape, scale it in some way, and that I think would be the way to go in future.
I think this is a great place to stop for today. I stay with this observation of us observing children observe the natural world and learn from them, and also the fact that when you see hope, it gives you hope. So, what if we measured this intangible ability to observe, to create hope, and what if we created an asset, no national asset, to combat and to be more resilient in the face of natural disasters. What a profound way to look at it, Manu. What an incredible journey. I feel this is just the beginning, and there's so many 16 questions in the chat box that people and comments and ideas. I want to thank you, Manu, for sharing your wisdom and your journey with us, for your team, your incredible team, for the great work with Seeds, and also for the Ashoka community to hold space for these important conversations and ideas. And we hope to see you next week in our Welcome Change. Enjoy your morning, your day, and your evening, Manu. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you for having me here.